The wind coming off Buchchon mountain was sharp enough to cut glass. It whipped through the scaffolding of the Gyeongbokgung Palace restoration site, carrying a mixture of snow and ancient dust. Nora Michaels stood in the center of the chaos, her breath clouding in the freezing air. She wore a heavy navy parka, a hard hat, and the expression of a woman who was about to dismantle a man's ego. "Stop," she said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command that cut through the noise of the power saws. Foreman Kim, a man who had been building in Seoul since before Nora was born, paused. He looked down at her with a thinly veiled sneer. "Director Michaels, we are on a schedule. The chairman wants a restoration, Mr. Kim, not a fabrication." Nora stepped over a pile of lumber, her boots crunching on the frozen earth. She picked up a slat of wood from the pile Kim's crew was preparing to install. She held it up. "This is treated composite. I specified Gumgong song, red pine." "It is the same look," Kim argued, waving a dismissive hand. "Nobody will know. The paint covers it." Nora dropped the wood. It clattered loudly on the stone foundation. She switched from English to fluent, stinging Korean. Her accent was slight, but her grammar was impeccable, utilizing the high formal register that demanded respect. "The wood breathes, Mr. Kim. Composite chokes. If you install this, the moisture trapped inside will rot the structural beams within 5 years. You aren't just cutting corners. You are sabotaging a national treasure." She took a step closer, towering in her presence even if he was physically taller. "I have read your invoices. You build Park and Company for red pine. You bought composite. Unless you want me to call the police for embezzlement right now, you will tear this down and start over." The silence on the construction site was deafening. The other workers stopped, staring. A black woman, an outsider, dressing down the foreman in his own language. Kim's face turned red, then pale. He bowed stiffly. "I will check the supply order again. It must be a mistake." "Fix it," Nora said, turning her back on him. "By tomorrow." 50 yards away, behind the tinted, bulletproof glass of a black Maybach, Chon-Woo Park watched the entire exchange. "Should I intervene, sir?" his assistant, Secretary Lee, asked from the front seat. "Foreman Kim can be volatile." Chon-Woo didn't blink. He watched Nora Michaels brush sawdust off her sleeve, her posture rigid and regal amidst the debris. He saw the fire in her eyes even from this distance. "No," Chon-Woo said, his voice a low rumble. "She has him terrified." He looked at the tablet in his lap. It showed the background check on Nora Michaels. Yale, Sorbonne, lead restorationist on the Forbidden City project. She wasn't just qualified, she was a force of nature. For months, his board had pressured him to fire her, citing cultural incompatibility. They wanted a Korean face on the project. Chon-Woo watched Nora pull a notebook from her pocket, aggressively sketching a detail of the roofline, ignoring the biting cold. "Drive," Chon-Woo ordered, "and fire Foreman Kim in the morning. Quietly. Make sure Miss Michaels thinks it was her victory." The sun had set, plunging the palace grounds into blue shadows. Nora was packing her bag in the temporary porta-cabin office when the door opened without a knock. A man in a sleek gray suit stepped in. He didn't look like a construction worker. He looked like money, dirty money. "Director Michaels," he smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I am from the Jangsan Development Group." Nora zipped her bag. "The site is closed." "We own the land adjacent to the west wall," the man said, sliding a thick manila envelope onto her desk. "We are planning a high-rise. We need adjustments to your heritage report. If you declare the west wall structurally insignificant, we can build closer to the palace." Nora looked at the envelope. It was thick enough to pay off her student loans twice over. She looked back at him. "You want me to devalue a UNESCO site so you can build a condo?" Nora asked, her voice flat. We want you to be cooperative. It is a lonely city for a foreigner, Ms. Michaels. Accidents happen on construction sites. Visas get revoked. Nora picked up the envelope. The man smiled. She walked to the trash can and dropped it in. The thud was heavy. Get out, she said, before I call Chairman Park. The man's smile vanished. His eyes narrowed into slits. Park cannot watch you everywhere, little girl. Enjoy your Christmas. Nora's apartment, Mapogu. Nora was exhausted. Her bones ached from the cold. All she wanted was a hot shower and the leftover kimchi jjigae in her fridge. She stepped off the elevator on the 14th floor. The hallway was quiet, too quiet. As she turned the corner to her unit, she stopped. Her front door was ajar. The lock hadn't just been picked. The wood around the frame was splintered, as if kicked in by a heavy boot. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. She reached into her bag, her fingers wrapping around the only weapon she had, a heavy metal architectural ruler. She pushed the door open with her foot. Hello, she called out, her voice trembling. Silence. She stepped inside and gasped. Her apartment was destroyed. It wasn't a robbery. It was an evisceration. Her bookshelf was toppled. Her laptop was smashed on the floor. But it was the walls that made her stomach turn. Her blueprints. Copies of the Gyeongbokgung restoration plans were taped to the walls and slashed to ribbons. And there, stabbed deep into the drywall right where she usually hung her coat, was a serrated hunting knife. Pinned under the blade was a photo of her, taken from across the street earlier that day. The message was clear. We can get to you. Nora dropped her bag. Her hands shook so hard she could barely hold her phone. She dialed 112. Connecting. Before the operator could answer, the line clicked and went dead. Her phone rang immediately. Unknown number. Answer it, a deep voice commanded from the hallway behind her. Nora spun around, raising the metal ruler. Chan-woo Park stood in her doorway. He was not the polished CEO she saw in boardrooms. He was wearing a black tactical trench coat, the collar turned up, leather gloves. His hair was windblown. Behind him stood two massive men who looked more like special forces than security guards. Chan-woo didn't look at her. He looked past her, at the destroyed apartment. His eyes swept over the smashed laptop, the shredded plans, and finally, they landed on the knife in the wall. Nora watched the air leave the room. Chan-woo's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. His jaw set hard, a muscle feathering in his cheek. It was a look of pure, lethal fury. He stepped inside, the glass crunching under his boots. He walked straight to the knife. He stared at it for a second, then pulled it out of the wall with a single, violent yank. He tossed it onto the floor with disgust. He finally turned to Nora. His dark eyes were bottomless pools of intensity. He took in her shaking hands, her fear. He took one step toward her, closing the distance, his large frame blocking out the view of the destruction. Did you call the police? He asked. His voice was terrifyingly calm. I tried, Nora whispered. The line cut. I cut it, Chan-woo said. The police will file a report. They will take a statement. Then they will leave you here. Jang-san owns the precinct captain. Nora's eyes widened. How do you know it was Jang-san? Because I know how my enemies think. Chan-woo took her wrist. His leather glove was cold, but his grip was iron solid. It wasn't aggressive. It was anchoring. If you stay here tonight, you will be in the hospital or the morgue by morning. I have nowhere else to go, she stammered, the shock finally setting in. Chan-woo looked down at her. For the first time, his mask slipped. A flicker of something raw and protective burned in his gaze. You are with me now, he stated, It wasn't an offer. It was a decree. He turned to his security team. Sanitize the room. Get the hard drives. Burn the rest. He looked back at Nora, his gaze locking onto hers, demanding total submission to his plan. Pack a bag, Nora, he said, using her first name for the first time. You don't exist in Seoul anymore. The interior of the Maybach was a hermetically sealed capsule of silence and leather, cutting through the blizzard that had begun to swallow Seoul. Nora sat in the passenger seat, her knees pulled tight against her chest, her knuckles white as she gripped the door handle. Every time a headlight flashed in the rearview mirror, she flinched, expecting to see a tail. But the most unnerving thing wasn't the storm outside. It was the man beside her. Chan-woo Park was driving. For the 3 months Nora had known him, Chan-woo had never touched a steering wheel. He was a man who was driven, ushered, and escorted. Yet here he was, having dismissed his security detail at the safe house, piloting the heavy vehicle himself. He drove with a terrifying, controlled aggression, weaving through the late-night traffic with precise, sharp movements. "Where are we going?" Nora asked. Her voice sounded thin, brittle, in the heavy silence. Chan-woo didn't take his eyes off the slick road. The dashboard lights cast a ghostly blue glow over his sharp profile. He had shed the tactical coat, revealing a charcoal cashmere turtleneck that emphasized the width of his shoulders. "Somewhere without cameras," he replied. "Somewhere the Jongsan Group cannot track via GPS or land deeds." "My team," Nora started, her mind racing back to the restoration site. "If I don't show up tomorrow, the Cultural Heritage Administration will—" "I have already handled it," Chan-woo interrupted smoothly. "Secretary Lee has informed the administration that you have been called away on a family emergency in the States. You are officially off the grid." Nora turned to him, shock momentarily overriding her fear. "You lied to them? You can't just erase me from my job, Chan-woo." He shifted gears, the engine growling as he took a sharp exit ramp toward the old city. He finally glanced at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "I didn't erase you from your job, Nora. I erased you from the kill list." Buchchon Hanok Village, the Northern Ridge. Time, 21:45. The car climbed. They left the neon glare of Gangnam and the bustling avenues of Jongno behind, winding up into the narrow, labyrinthine streets of Buchchon. The snow was heavier here, undisturbed. The modern skyscrapers of Seoul disappeared, replaced by the curving tiled roofs and stone walls of the 14th century. It was like driving back in time. Chan-woo slowed the car as the road became impossibly narrow. He stopped before a massive set of double wooden gates, flanked by high stone walls that looked centuries old. There was no digital keypad, no intercom, no security camera. "Stay in the car," he ordered. He stepped out into the biting wind. Nora watched as he produced a heavy, rusted iron key from his pocket. He unlocked the gates and pushed them open manually. The heavy wood groaned against the snow. He drove the car into the courtyard, and as the gates closed behind them, the sound of the city vanished completely. Nora stepped out of the car and gasped. The cold hit her instantly, sharp and dry, but the view stole her breath. It was a hanok, a traditional Korean house, but it was unlike any she had studied. It was massive, constructed of dark, ancient timber and pristine white paper screens. The structure formed a square around a central courtyard where a twisted pine tree stood, dusted with white. It was beautiful, and it was utterly desolate. "This is my grandfather's retreat," Chan-woo said, grabbing her bag from the trunk. His voice echoed in the emptiness. "It is not registered under the Park Corporation. It is not on any tourist map. Even my board of directors doesn't know this place exists." He walked toward the main wing, his boots leaving deep prints in the snow. "Come inside. It will take time to get the heat working." Nora didn't move. She stood by the car, looking at the high walls that effectively boxed them in. The adrenaline from the break-in was fading, replaced by a sudden, sharp realization of her reality. She was hidden. She was running. And she hated it. "I can't stay here," she said. Chan-woo stopped on the wooden veranda. He turned slowly. "Excuse me?" "I can't hide in a hole while they tear apart my work," Nora said, her voice shaking but gaining volume. "I am the lead architect on the Gyeongbokgung project. If I disappear, Jangsan wins. They'll bulldoze the West Wall within a week." "Nora, get inside," Chan-woo warned, his patience thinning. "No," Nora snapped. She took a step toward him, her architectural pride flaring up as a defense mechanism against her fear. "I have a deadline, Mr. Park. I have a responsibility to those blueprints. You hired me because I fight for the history, not because I run away when—" Chan-woo dropped her bag in the snow. He moved so fast she didn't have time to flinch. In 2 strides, he was off the veranda and towering over her. He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. He loomed over her, his sheer physical presence blocking out the moonlight, trapping her between the heat of his body and the freezing car door. Nora's breath hitched. She looked up, and for the first time, she saw the alpha that the business world feared. His jaw was clenched tight enough to snap, his eyes blazing with a terrifying intensity. "Do you think I care about the wall?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerously low register that vibrated in her chest. "Chan-woo, Look at me," he commanded. Nora froze, staring into his eyes. "They put a knife in your wall, Nora," he said, enunciating every word with lethal precision. "The next one was meant for your throat. Do you understand that? This isn't corporate espionage. This is a culling." He leaned closer. He was so close she could smell the scent of expensive oud and the cold winter air clinging to his skin. He placed a hand on the roof of the car, caging her in, his face inches from hers. "I don't care about the deadline. I don't care about the damn palace. I can buy a new palace. I cannot buy another you." The confession hung in the freezing air between them, heavy and undeniable. Nora's heart slammed against her ribs, not from fear anymore, but from the sudden, overwhelming weight of his protection. Chan-woo stared at her lips for a fraction of a second, then forced his gaze back to her eyes. His voice softened, but the steel remained. "There is no project if you are dead, Nora. You are under my command until the threat is neutralized. Do you understand?" Nora swallowed hard, her defiance melting under the heat of his gaze. She nodded, unable to find her voice. Chan-woo held her gaze for a beat longer, ensuring she wasn't going to run. Then he stepped back, picking up her bag from the snow and dusting it off. The mask of the cool CEO slid back into place, though his eyes remained stormy. "Good," he said, turning toward the dark, silent house. "Now get inside. You're shivering." The silence of the haynock was different from the silence of a penthouse. It wasn't the absence of noise. It was the presence of history. The heavy timber beams seemed to absorb sound, creating a vacuum that magnified every movement. Chan-woo Park stood in the center of the kitchen, staring at a cast iron kettle as if it were a complex architectural puzzle he couldn't solve. He was the chairman of a conglomerate that built ships, microchips, and skyscrapers. He could negotiate billion-dollar mergers without blinking. But he had never, in his 43 years of life, boiled his own water. He reached for the knob of the gas range, hesitated, and pulled his hand back. He didn't know which dial controlled the burner. "Push and turn," a voice said softly from the doorway. Chan-woo stiffened. He turned to see Nora standing there. She had changed out of her work clothes into a thick, oversized wool sweater and leggings she had pulled from her bag. She looked smaller without her armor of blazers and hard hats. Softer. She walked past him, the scent of vanilla lotion disrupting his senses. With practiced ease, she pushed the knob, turned it, and the blue flame roared to life. She took the kettle from his hand, her fingers brushing against his cold palm, and set it on the grate. "I assume you wanted tea," she asked, not looking at him as she opened the cupboards. "I usually have staff for this," Chan-woo admitted, his voice rough. He felt foolish. The alpha stripped of his retinue. Nora found a jar of honey-preserved citron, yuja. She spooned the thick yellow marmalade into 2 ceramic cups. "My grandmother raised me," she said quietly. "She taught me that a man who can't feed himself is a man who can't lead a household. But I suppose when you own half the city, the rules are different." She poured the boiling water. The steam curled up between them, smelling of sharp citrus and sweet honey. She slid a cup across the wooden counter toward him. For a moment, the hierarchy of the outside world evaporated. There was no chairman and architect. There was just a man who didn't know how to work a stove and a woman who did. Chan-woo wrapped his hands around the warm ceramic. He watched her bring her own cup to her lips, blowing softly on the steam. He tracked the movement of her throat as she swallowed. "You are angry with me," he stated. "I'm terrified, Chan-woo," she corrected, meeting his gaze. "And I'm angry that my safety depends on you knowing how to hide. But—" She took another sip. "The tea is good. Thank you for the shelter." Chan-woo took a sip. It was sweet, hot, and grounded him in a way the scotch in his office never did. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the exhaustion etched under her eyes. "Go to sleep, Nora," he said softly. "I will take the first watch." The temperature dropped like a stone. Outside, the blizzard had turned into a whiteout, burying the courtyard in feet of snow. The wind howled through the eaves, rattling the paper Chenghoji doors. Nora woke up shivering. It wasn't just a chill, it was a bone-deep freeze. She was curled into a tight ball under the quilt, but her teeth were chattering uncontrollably. She could see her breath in the darkness, puffing out in white clouds like dragon smoke. She reached out to touch the floor. The ondol, the traditional underfloor heating system that pumped hot air through stones beneath the floorboards, was stone cold. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. She sat up, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders like a cape, and stumbled toward the sliding door. Her feet felt like blocks of ice against the wood. The control panel on the wall was dark. The pilot light had gone out. The room was becoming an icebox. Nora tried to rub warmth into her arms, but the cold was aggressive. It bit at her skin. She knew enough about these old houses to know that, without the floor heat, the thin walls offered zero insulation against a Korean winter. She needed help. Chan-woo hadn't slept. He was sitting in the main hall, reading a report on his tablet, when he heard the soft slide of a door opening down the corridor. He looked up and saw her. Nora was standing at the end of the hallway, wrapped in her quilt, shaking so violently she could barely stand. Her lips were a pale shade of violet. Chan-woo dropped the tablet. It clattered loudly on the floor. He crossed the distance in 3 long strides. "Nora?" The floor," she stammered, her teeth clicking together. "It's cold. It stopped." Chan-woo cursed under his breath. He reached out and touched her arm through the quilt. She was freezing. He grabbed her hand. It was like holding a piece of ice. "The wind must have blown out the external boiler for the guest wing," he growled. "This house hasn't been used in 5 years. The systems are old." He looked back at the guest room. It was uninhabitable. He looked at the snowstorm raging outside. There was no way a repair crew could get up the mountain tonight. He looked back at Nora. She was looking at him with wide, desperate eyes, her body racking with tremors. There was only one solution. "Come," he said. He didn't wait for her to argue. He guided her down the hall, his hand firm on her back, steering her toward the double doors at the end of the corridor. He slid the doors open. A wave of warmth hit them. The master bedroom was on a separate heating loop. The floor was radiant with heat, the air thick and comfortable. A single lamp glowed in the corner, illuminating a room that was Spartan but luxurious. In the center of the room, there was a thick traditional cotton mattress, laid out on the warm floor. It was large, but it was still just one mattress. Nora stopped at the threshold. She looked at the bed, then up at him. Chanwoo! It's 20 degrees below zero outside, Chanwoo said, his voice leaving no room for debate. He walked into the room and grabbed a second set of heavy silk quilts from a cedar chest. He tossed the extra bedding onto the floor. The guest room is dangerous. Hypothermia sets in within hours in these conditions, he explained, stripping off his watch and placing it on a low table. He turned to face her. Nora hugged her quilt tighter. The warmth of the room was already making her dizzy with relief. But the intimacy of the situation was a different kind of danger. I can sleep in the hall, she whispered. The hall has no heat, Chanwoo countered. He walked toward the bed. He pointed to the center of the mattress. Get in. Nora hesitated. Chanwoo sighed, a sound of frustration and exhaustion. He stepped closer, stopping 2 feet away from her. The dim light cast shadows over his sharp cheekbones. He looked powerful, dangerous, and utterly exhausted. Nora, he said softly, look at me. She met his gaze. I'm a man of significant resources, but tonight, all I have to offer you is a warm floor. He gestured to the vast mattress. The floor in my room is warm. I will sleep on the perimeter, he said, pointing to the edge of the mattress near the door. You take the center, where the heat is strongest. He held her gaze, his eyes dark and solemn, stripping away any coyness or suggestion. This was a business transaction of survival. I give you my word as a park, he vowed, his voice low and vibrating with sincerity. I will not cross the line. I will not touch you unless you ask, but I will not let you freeze in my house. Nora looked at him. She saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't trying to seduce her. He was trying to keep her alive. She nodded slowly. Okay. She stepped onto the warm floor, her frozen toes curling in delight at the heat radiating from the stones beneath. She moved to the center of the mattress and lay down, pulling the heavy silk covers up to her chin. Chanwoo turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, save for the moonlight filtering through the paper screens. She heard the rustle of fabric as he settled onto the far edge of the mattress, leaving a distinct, respectful canyon of space between them. Good night, Nora. His voice came from the dark, deep and rumbling. Good night, Chanwoo, she whispered. She closed her eyes. For the first time since the break-in, she stopped shaking. But as the heat seeped back into her bones, her heart began to race for an entirely different reason. The most powerful man in Seoul was sleeping 3 feet away, and he was the only thing standing between her and the storm. The master bedroom. Time, 3 o'clock. The room was a capsule of contradictions. Beneath them, the ondal floor hummed with radiant heat, baking the thick cotton of the mattress. But the air above was frigid, the breath of the blizzard seeping through the porous paper of the Chenghoji doors. Nora lay on her back in the center of the bed, her eyes wide open, staring at the wooden rafters barely visible in the moonlight. She was rigid, her arms pinned to her sides under the silk quilt. 3 feet away, on the edge of the mattress, lay Chanwoo Park. He was a dark shape in the periphery of her vision. He lay on his back, perfectly still, his hands resting on his stomach. He hadn't moved a muscle in 20 minutes, yet Nora knew he wasn't asleep. The rhythm of his breathing was too controlled, too deliberate. The space between them, the invisible line, felt charged with enough static electricity to power the city they had left behind. Nora shifted slightly, the silk rustling like a gunshot in the silence. You are overthinking. Chanwoo's voice cut through the dark. It was low, gravelly, stripped of his usual boardroom polish. I'm in a bed with my employer, hiding from a crime syndicate in a 14th century house, Nora whispered back, staring at the ceiling. I think I'm thinking the appropriate amount. She heard a soft exhale from his side of the bed, a sound that might have been a laugh, had it come from anyone else. The door is locked, Nora. The gates are barred. For tonight the world stops at that wall. Does it? She turned her head on the pillow to look at him. He was staring at the ceiling, his profile sharp against the shadows. Without a suit, without the distance of a desk, he looked younger but also heavier, burdened by things she couldn't see. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt less like a wall and more like a bridge. Why me? Nora asked. Chanwoo didn't turn his head. We went over this. Your portfolio is... No, Nora interrupted softly. Not the credentials. There are 20 architects in Seoul with my resume. Half of them are your golfing buddies. Bringing me in was a PR nightmare. You knew the traditionalists would hate it. You knew the board would fight you. So why did you do it? Chanwoo was silent for a long time. The wind howled outside, rattling the frame of the house. Do you remember the budget meeting? 6 months ago? He asked. Vividly. I told your CFO he was an idiot. You told me I was a coward, Chanwoo corrected. Nora winced. I said you were compromising your legacy for quarterly gains. I didn't say coward. It is the same thing. Chanwoo finally turned his head. His eyes caught the faint moonlight, glinting like obsidian. I have been chairman since I was 24. Do you know what my days are like, Nora? I walk into a room, and people become mirrors. They reflect what they think I want to see. They agree with my bad ideas. They laugh at my unfunny jokes. They lie to me from the moment I wake up until the moment I sign off. He shifted, turning onto his side so he was facing her across the expanse of the mattress. Then you walked in, he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. You looked me in the eye, and you didn't see a bank account. You saw a man making a mistake, and you told him the truth. Nora's breath hitched. She remembered the terror of that moment, thinking she had ended her career. I didn't hire you for the buildings, Nora, Chanwoo admitted, the vulnerability in his voice stark and shocking. I hired you because you were the first real thing I had seen in 10 years. Nora stared at him, her heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against the mattress. The distance between them suddenly felt negligible. It wasn't about heat anymore. It was about gravity. I'm not easy to manage, Chanwoo, she warned softly. I don't want to manage you, he replied. I want to watch you work. The temperature in the room plummeted as the eye of the storm passed over the mountain. Nora had drifted into a light doze, but the cold woke her. The heat from the floor was constant, but the air around her face and shoulders was biting. The single quilt she had wasn't enough to trap the warmth. She curled tighter, pulling her knees up, but her body betrayed her. Her teeth began to chatter. It was an involuntary, rhythmic sound of hypothermia creeping in. She tried to clench her jaw to stop it, but a violent shiver raked through her body, shaking the mattress. In the darkness, the breathing next to her stopped. Nora? I'm fine, she stammered, her voice shaking. Just a cold draft. She heard the rustle of heavy fabric. Then, movement. Chanwoo sat up. The shadow of his torso loomed large in the darkness. You are freezing, he stated. I'm okay. Go back to sleep. He ignored her. He didn't ask for permission this time. The situation had moved past protocol. Chanwoo grabbed the thick, down-filled duvet that covered his own body. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of him, cedar, rain, and skin. He moved across the invisible line. He didn't climb over her. He knelt on the mattress beside her, hovering but not touching. With deliberate, gentle movements, he spread his duvet over her existing quilt, doubling the insulation. But he didn't stop there. He saw her trembling, saw how the cold air was sneaking in around her neck. "Lift your head," he murmured. Nora obeyed, paralyzed by his nearness. Chanwoo tucked the heavy duvet around her shoulders. His hands, large and warm, brushed against her neck. The contact was electric. His knuckles grazed her jawline as he ensured the blanket was sealed tight, trapping the heat. For a heartbeat, he froze. His hand was lingering near her face. He was leaning over her, his face inches away. She could feel his breath, warm and steady, against her frozen cheek. If she lifted her chin 1 inch, their lips would meet. The air crackled with the possibility of it. The alpha was gone. This was just a man who desperately wanted to close the gap. Nora stopped breathing. She watched his eyes track down to her mouth, dark with a hunger he was fighting to control. Then the mask slammed back down. Chanwoo pulled his hand back as if burned. He retreated to his side of the mattress, now lying with only a thin throw blanket over his legs, having given her his warmth. "Sleep, Nora," he commanded, his voice rougher than before, strained. "I will not let the cold touch you." Nora burrowed into the heaviness of his duvet, surrounded by his scent, her shivering slowly subsiding. She looked across the gap. Chanwoo was lying on his back, staring at the ceiling, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had kept his word. He hadn't crossed the line to take. He had crossed it to give. And that, Nora realized as she drifted off, was infinitely more dangerous for her heart. The storm had broken. Nora woke to a silence so profound it felt heavy. She slid the paper door of the bedroom open and squinted against the blinding brilliance of the world outside. The blizzard had dumped 2 feet of pristine, diamond dust snow over the haynock. The twisted pine tree in the center of the courtyard was bowed under the weight, a sculpture of white against a sky of piercing, cloudless blue. It was Christmas morning. She walked out onto the wooden maru veranda, wrapping Chanwoo's heavy wool cardigan around herself. It swallowed her frame, smelling of sandalwood and the faint metallic scent of snow. Chanwoo was already there. He was sitting on the edge of the veranda, one leg dangling off the side, a mug of steaming coffee in his hand. He wore a thick cable-knit sweater, the color of oatmeal, a stark departure from his armor of charcoal suits. He looked rested. The dark circles under his eyes faded, but his gaze was fixed on the closed gates of the compound, always guarding. He heard her footsteps and turned. The tension in his shoulders dropped the moment he saw her. "Merry Christmas," he said. His voice was rough with morning use, intimate and low. "Merry Christmas," Nora replied, sitting down next to him, keeping a respectable foot of distance between them. "We're trapped, aren't we?" Chanwoo gestured to the wall of snow blocking the exit. "The plows won't reach this altitude until tomorrow. We are effectively besieged." He took a sip of his coffee. "I hope you aren't disappointed. No gala, no champagne, no speeches." "This is the best Christmas I've had in years," Nora admitted, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Usually I'm working, or flying, or arguing with contractors." Chanwoo set his mug down. He reached behind him and produced a small, square box wrapped in midnight blue velvet. Nora's heart sank slightly. Jewelry. It was the standard rich man gift. A diamond necklace to apologize for the kidnapping, the danger, the cold floor. It felt transactional. "Chanwoo, you didn't have to—" "Open it," he commanded softly. Nora took the box. It was heavy heavier than a ring or a necklace. She lifted the velvet lid. Inside, nestled in the satin lining, was not a diamond. It was a silver, industrial-grade encrypted hard drive. Nora frowned, looking up at him. A USB drive? Plug it in, Chan-woo said, nodding toward her laptop, which sat on the low table inside the room. The living room. Time. 8:45. Nora sat cross-legged on the heated floor, the laptop screen casting a glow on her face. Chan-woo sat opposite her, watching her reaction with an intensity that made the air feel thin. She entered the password he gave her, a string of numbers. The drive decrypted. A folder appeared on the screen. Archive 1867, Private Collection. Nora clicked it. Hundreds of high-resolution scans flooded the screen. Her eyes widened. She leaned closer, her breath hitching in her throat. These weren't just blueprints. These were the Ilsung-nok, the daily records of the royal court, specifically the lost construction logs of the Forgotten Wing. This is impossible, Nora whispered, scrolling frantically. These were burned during the occupation. They don't exist. They existed, Chan-woo corrected quietly. They were in the private vault of a collector in Macau. He has been holding them for 40 years, refusing to let the Korean government see them. Nora stopped scrolling. She stared at a hand-drawn diagram of the roof structure, the exact section she had been fighting with Foreman Kim about. The diagram confirmed she was right. It also solved 3 structural problems she had been losing sleep over for months. She looked up at Chan-woo, her eyes wide with shock. Chan-woo, this collector, he wouldn't just give these up. These are priceless. How did you get them? Chan-woo shrugged, a casual motion that belied the magnitude of what he had done. I made him an offer he couldn't refuse. It cost a few million, and I had to trade a piece of land in Jeju. Nora stared at him. You spent millions on scans? I bought the originals. They are being flown to the Cultural Heritage Administration as we speak, Chan-woo said. But I wanted you to have the data first. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You were losing sleep over that roof, Nora. I could see it in your face every time we video called. You were terrified you were guessing. Now, he pointed to the screen. Now, you don't have to guess. Now, you can prove them all wrong. Tears pricked Nora's eyes. It wasn't the money. He could have bought her a car, a building, an island, and she wouldn't have cared. But this was him seeing her. He had noticed her stress. He had validated her intellect. He had moved mountains not to give her a luxury, but to give her the tools to do her life's work. He hadn't tried to save her. He had armed her. Nora's voice cracked. She wiped at her eye furiously, hating to cry, but the emotion was overwhelming. You are a dangerous man, Chan-woo Park. I have been told, he said, watching her with a guarded expression, unsure if he had overstepped. Nora closed the laptop. She shifted on the floor, moving into his space. She reached out. Her hand, warm and trembling slightly, landed on his forearm. Under the thick wool of his sweater, she felt his muscle snap rigid. Chan-woo froze. He stopped breathing. He stared down at her hand on his sleeve as if she had placed a burning brand there. It was the first time she had touched him without being forced by cold or danger. It was voluntary. It was affectionate. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Chan-woo lifted his gaze from her hand to her face. The Ice King was gone. In his eyes, there was a raw, starving hunger that terrified her and thrilled her in equal measure. He looked at her like a man who had been adrift at sea for years and had just found solid ground. Thank you, she whispered, squeezing his arm gently. This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever done for me. Chan-woo didn't move his arm. He didn't pull away, and he didn't grab her. He just sat there, vibrating with the effort of his restraint, letting her touch anchor him to the earth. "It is just data, Nora," he said, his voice straining to remain steady, sounding deeper than the ocean trench. "No," Nora shook her head, her thumb brushing the fabric of his sleeve. "It's you. It's all you." For a long minute, the only sound in the room was the beating of two hearts and the settling of the snow on the roof. Chan-woo looked at her hand, then back to her eyes, and in that silent exchange, the dynamic shifted irrevocably. He wasn't just her protector anymore, and she wasn't just his assignment. "Don't remove your hand," he murmured, the command slipping out before he could stop it. "I won't," she promised, and she didn't. The outer courtyard, time, December 26th, 1400 hours. The reception in the mountains was spotty, but Chan-woo Park didn't need a strong signal to destroy a company. He just needed a voice connection. He paced the length of the snowy courtyard, a solitary figure in a black cashmere coat against the blinding white backdrop. His breath plumed in the freezing air like dragon smoke. He wasn't yelling. He was speaking with a terrifying, quiet cadence that was infinitely worse than screaming. "I don't care about the rumors, Director Choi," Chan-woo said into his phone, his boots crunching rhythmically on the packed snow. "I want their liquidity frozen by market close." He listened for a moment, his jaw tightening. "Yes, the Jangsen Group. I want you to trigger the margin calls on their construction loans. Call the risk management team at Shinhan. Tell them Park and Company is pulling our partnership if Jangsan remains on their ledger." He stopped at the edge of the stone wall, looking out over the valley where the distant smog of Seoul hung like a gray shroud. "They threaten my asset," Chan-woo said, his voice dropping to a glacial whisper. "I don't want to just beat them in court. I want their stock price under 5,000 won by Friday. I want them so busy trying to save their own skin, they forget she even exists." He hung up without a goodbye. He stood there for a moment, the CEO mode still humming in his veins, the ruthlessness that had earned him the nickname the Ice King. He checked his phone again, stock tickers, news alerts. He was orchestrating a financial massacre from a mountaintop. He turned to look back at the house. Through the paper screen of the living room, he could see Nora's silhouette. She was working on the blueprints he had given her. The ice in his eyes melted instantly. He wasn't destroying Jangsan for profit. He was burning them to the ground so she could walk out the front gate without looking over her shoulder. The master bedroom. Time, 3:15. The night was windless and silent, but in Nora's mind, the noise was deafening. Crack. In the dream, the sound of the wood splintering was amplified. She was back in her apartment. The doorframe exploded inward. She couldn't move. She was paralyzed, holding the metal ruler, watching the heavy boots step onto her carpet. Thud, thud. A hand reached out, not to grab her, but to pin the knife to the wall. The knife turned into the foreman's face, laughing. Then the room dissolved into snow, and she was drowning in it, unable to breathe, the cold filling her lungs. "No!" Nora woke with a gasp, lurching upright. She was disoriented, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The room was dark. The air was still. She was sweating despite the cold air in the room, her chest heaving as she tried to pull oxygen into her lungs. She scrambled backward, pressing her back against the wall, her eyes darting around the shadows. Where is the knife? Where are they? The sliding door hissed open. Nora flinched, pulling her knees up to her chest, a whimper escaping her throat. Nora? It wasn't a question. It was a grounding wire. Chan-woo was there. He moved silently, like a shadow detaching itself from the dark. He wasn't wearing his armor. No suit, no coat. Just a simple gray t-shirt and loose sleeping pants. He didn't rush her. He didn't turn on the light. He knew that sudden movements would shatter her. He walked to the side of the mattress and sat down on the floor, crossing his legs. He sat close enough that she could sense his heat, but he respected the invisible boundary. He didn't reach out to hug her. He didn't try to shush her fear. He simply offered his hand. He laid it palm up on the mattress between them. A large, steady, open hand. An invitation. "You are safe," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "The gates are locked. The guards are posted. Nothing gets in here." Nora stared at his hand. Her breathing was ragged, tears pricking her eyes as the adrenaline crash hit her. She felt small. She felt broken. I heard the door," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It was a dream," Chanwoo said firmly. "Look at my hand, Nora. Focus on that. You are in Buchchon. You are with me." Nora reached out. Her hand was shaking violently. She placed her palm against his. Chanwoo didn't just hold her hand. He anchored her. His fingers closed around hers, swallowing her smaller hand in his warmth. He didn't squeeze too hard, just enough to let her feel the solidity of his bone and muscle. "I have you," he murmured. 4 hours passed. The moon tracked across the sky and vanished behind the peaks. The sky turned from black to a bruised purple and finally to a pale, watery gray. Chanwoo hadn't moved. He sat on the hardwood floor, his back perfectly straight, his legs likely numb from the position. He hadn't checked his phone. He hadn't asked her to go back to sleep. He hadn't pulled his hand away. Nora had eventually exhausted herself. She had slid back down onto the mattress, her cheek resting on the pillow, her body finally relaxing into a deep, dreamless sleep. But she hadn't let go. She was gripping his hand with both of hers, pulling it close to her chest like a lifeline. Chanwoo watched her sleep. His arm was extended awkwardly across the mattress, his shoulder aching from the strain of the angle, but he ignored the pain. To him, the pain was a penance. It was the least he could do for failing to protect her from the fear in the first place. As the first ray of golden winter sun hit the paper screen, illuminating the room in a soft amber glow, Nora stirred. She blinked open her eyes. She felt the warmth against her chest. She looked down and saw his hand, still engulfed in hers. She looked up. Chanwoo was watching her. His face was tired, the stubble on his jaw darker than usual, but his eyes were alert, soft. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice rasping with sleep. "I told you," Chanwoo said simply, his thumb brushing over her knuckles, a tiny, intimate movement that sent a shiver through her entire body. "I go nowhere without you." He slowly withdrew his hand, wincing slightly as the blood rushed back into his arm. He stood up, towering over the bed, silhouetted by the morning light. "Try to sleep another hour," he said, adjusting the blanket over her shoulder, his touch lingering for a second too long. "I have a company to bankrupt before breakfast." Iki, for the first time in 3 days, the sun was actually warm. The air remained crisp, but the hostility of the blizzard had passed, leaving the hanok glistening under a blanket of white diamond dust. Nora was in her element. She stood near the west wing of the house, a laser measure in her hand, comparing the physical eaves of the roof to the scans on her tablet. She was humming softly, a jazz tune she hadn't realized she was vocalizing. Chanwoo sat on the maru, ostensibly reading a financial report on his tablet. In reality, he hadn't read a single sentence in 20 minutes. He was watching Nora. He watched the way her brow furrowed when the measurements didn't align. He watched the way the sunlight caught the coils of her hair. For a man who lived his life in quarterly projections and risk assessments, he found himself utterly captivated by the present moment. "The pitch is off by 2 degrees, Nora called out, turning to him with a triumphant grin. "The restoration team in the 90s got lazy." I knew it. Chan-woo smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. So, we fire the 90s team too? Absolutely, Nora laughed. It was a perfect moment. A fragile, crystalline bubble of peace in the middle of a war. And then the sound arrived. It started as a low whine, like a mosquito, but deeper. Mechanical. Chan-woo's smile vanished instantly. His head snapped up. His eyes scanned the sky, instantly shifting from relaxed observer to apex predator. Nora, he said, his voice low and urgent. Get inside. What? Nora looked up, shielding her eyes against the sun. Is that a bird? No, Chan-woo said, standing up so abruptly his tablet clattered onto the wood. It's a drone. The black quadcopter crested the high stone wall of the compound. It wasn't a toy. It was sleek, industrial, equipped with a stabilizing gimbal and a long-range lens. It hovered 40 feet in the air, its camera eye swiveling directly toward Nora. It could be paparazzi. It could be Jongsan surveillance. It could be carrying something worse than a camera. Nora, move! Chan-woo roared. Nora froze. The intrusion was so sudden, so jarring against the silence, that her brain lagged. She stared up at the mechanical vulture. Chan-woo didn't wait. He didn't run for cover. He ran toward the threat. As he sprinted across the snow-packed courtyard, he scooped up a decorative river stone. Smooth, heavy, the size of a baseball, from the garden border. He didn't break stride. He stopped 10 feet in front of Nora, planting his feet in the snow. He glared up at the machine, his face twisted in pure, primal aggression. The drone dipped lower, zooming in on Nora's face. Chan-woo wound back his arm. He had played pitcher for his university team before the weight of the empire crushed his hobbies, and the muscle memory was still there. He channeled every ounce of his fear, his rage, and his desperation into the motion. He threw the stone. It soared through the air with lethal velocity. Crack! The sound was sickeningly satisfying. The stone struck one of the drone's rotors with perfect accuracy. The plastic shattered. The machine let out a high-pitched mechanical scream, spun wildly out of control, and plummeted from the sky. It crashed into the snow on the far side of the courtyard, smoking. Chan-woo didn't stop to admire the shot. He spun around and lunged for Nora. He grabbed her by the waist, the momentum carrying them both backward until her back hit the wooden pillar of the veranda. He slammed his body against hers, pinning her to the wood. He wasn't hurting her, but he was suffocating her with his protection. He spread his arms out, gripping the pillar on either side of her head, making himself a human wall. His back was to the open courtyard, shielding her completely from the sky, the walls, and any other threats that might be coming. Stay down, he hissed, his breath hot against her ear. Don't move. Nora was pressed flush against him. She could feel his heart hammering against her chest. It was beating so fast it frightened her. She could feel the tremors of adrenaline racking his frame. His heavy wool coat was rough against her cheek, but he felt like a fortress. Chan-woo, she gasped, her hands instinctively clutching the lapels of his coat. It's down. You hit it. He didn't pull away. He kept her pinned, his head swiveling, scanning the roofline of the haynock, scanning the tops of the walls. His eyes were wide, wild, stripping away the civilization to reveal the raw instinct underneath. There could be a second one, he breathed, his voice ragged. Did you see a pilot? Did you see anyone on the ridge? No. It was just the machine. He stayed there for another full minute, covering her body with his own, refusing to expose even an inch of her to the open air. They were inside now. The heavy doors were shut and locked. The blinds were drawn. The sunlit peace was gone, replaced by a suffocating shadow. Chanwoo was pacing the length of the room. He was shaking, not from cold, but from the crash of adrenaline. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect style, pulling at the roots. "I have to move you," he muttered, talking to himself. "The safe house is compromised. If they have a visual, they have GPS coordinates. I'll call the helicopter. We can be in Busan by tonight." Nora sat on the floor watching him. She had seen Chanwoo angry. She had seen him arrogant. She had seen him tired. But she had never seen him afraid. His hands were trembling. His skin was pale. He looked like a man who had just watched a car swerve onto the sidewalk inches from his child. "Chanwoo," Nora said, her voice cutting through his panic. He stopped pacing. He turned to look at her. The look in his eyes stopped her breath. It wasn't the calculation of a CEO trying to fix a PR leak. It was sheer, unadulterated terror. And it wasn't fear of her. It was fear for her. He looked at her as if she were made of glass, and he was the only thing keeping her from shattering on the pavement. Nora stood up slowly. She walked toward him. He looked like he wanted to back away, to hide this vulnerability, but he held his ground. "You're shaking," she said softly. "I'm fine," he lied instantly. "It's just the cold." "You threw a rock at a drone, Chanwoo. You stood in front of me like a human shield." She took another step. She was close enough to touch him now. "If that had been a weapon, you would have taken it." Chanwoo looked away, his jaw working. "It is my job to ensure your safety." "Stop it," Nora said, her voice firm. "Stop talking like a contract. Stop talking like a boss." She reached out and took his face in her hands. His skin was burning hot. She forced him to look at her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. The question hung heavy in the room. "Why are you shaking? Why are you ready to tear the world apart for an architect you've known for 6 months? Chanwoo stared at her. The walls came down. The Ice King melted, leaving just a man standing in the wreckage of his own defenses. He covered her hands with his own, pressing her palms against his cheeks. He closed his eyes for a second, inhaling a shuddering breath. "Because," he whispered, opening his eyes to reveal a depth of emotion that terrified him. "Because if they hurt you, Nora, I will burn the city to ash, and I won't care who burns with it." He pulled her hands down from his face, gripping them tightly against his chest, right over his heart. "Do not ask me to explain it," he rasped, his voice breaking. "I don't have the logic for this. I just know that the thought of losing you, it ends me." The house was asleep, but they were not. The kitchen was illuminated only by the faint, bluish glow of the moonlight filtering through the high transom windows and the warm amber bulb of the stove's range hood. The rest of the Hanak was buried in shadow and silence. Chanwoo and Nora sat at the small wooden island. Between them sat a green glass bottle of premium Andong soju and 2 small ceramic cups. The air was thick, not with threat. The drone was gone. The security grid was reinforced, but with a suffocating magnetic tension that had been building since Chanwoo had pinned her against the veranda pillar. Chanwoo poured. The clear liquid splashed into Nora's cup, then his own. His hand was steady now, the tremors of the morning gone, replaced by a brooding, heavy stillness. He slid the cup toward her. He didn't drink. He just watched her, his dark eyes tracing the curve of her hand as she lifted the glass. "You haven't answered me," Nora said softly. The alcohol burned pleasantly in her throat, cutting through the exhaustion. "Earlier, in the living room, you said losing me would end you. You didn't explain why." Chanwoo looked down at his glass. He swirled the liquid, watching the vortex. He looked like a man standing on a precipice, deciding whether to step back or jump. "You know who I am, Nora," he began, his voice rough with the late hour. "I am Park Chanwoo, chairman, heir, strategy. My life is a series of quarters, mergers, and acquisitions. I wake up, I execute a plan, I sleep. He took a shot of soju, swallowing it without flinching. He set the cup down hard. My life is a corporation, Nora. Everything is calculated. Every friendship is a networking opportunity. Every marriage proposal is a merger discussion. I live in a world of absolute predictability. He looked up, locking eyes with her. The intensity of his gaze pinned her to the spot. Then you walked into that boardroom in your cheap blazer and your brilliance, and you told me I was wrong. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Not happy, but amazed. You are the only unpredictable variable I have ever allowed. Nora's heart skipped a beat. She set her glass down, her fingers trembling slightly. Chan-woo. I'm not protecting the architect, he interrupted, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. He leaned forward, bracing his elbows on the wood. I don't care about the Gyeongbokgung project. I can buy 100 temples. I'm protecting the only thing that makes me feel alive. The silence that followed was deafening. Nora stared at him, stripped of her defenses. He had just handed her the truth of his soul, that beneath the billions of one and the icy reputation, he was a man starving for reality, and he had found it in her. She didn't know what to do with that information. It was too big, too heavy to hold. That is a dangerous thing to admit, Nora whispered, to give someone that much power over you. I didn't give it, Chan-woo said. You took it. He stood up. Nora instinctively leaned back as he moved around the corner of the island. He didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of her stool. He stepped into her personal space, his legs brushing against her knees. The kitchen felt suddenly tiny. Chan-woo reached out. His hand, warm and calloused from the cold air, cupped the side of her face. His thumb rested on her chin, tilting her head up. Nora stopped breathing. He looked at her with a reverence that made her knees weak. His eyes roamed over her features, her forehead, her eyes, her lips, memorizing them. You have no idea, he murmured, how hard it is to be this close to you and do nothing. He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb, a slow, agonizingly gentle caress that sent shivers racing down her spine. His fingers tangled into the soft curls at the nape of her neck. He leaned in. Nora's eyes fluttered shut. She could feel his body heat radiating through her clothes. She could smell the faint scent of soju and cedar. She tilted her head, silently asking, silently pleading. His lips hovered inches from hers. She could feel the ghost of his breath against her mouth. The pull was gravity. It was inevitable. She parted her lips, ready to meet him. He stopped. He froze, barely a breath away from connecting. Nora opened her eyes, confused, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. Chan-woo was staring at her mouth with a look of pure, agonizing torture. His jaw was clenched so tight a muscle feathered in his cheek. He closed his eyes tightly for a second, forcing himself to breathe, forcing himself to regain control. He pulled back, just an inch, but it felt like miles. I can't, he rasped, his voice sounding like it was being torn from his throat. Chan-woo? Nora whispered, her voice laced with hurt. He opened his eyes, and they were black with desire, but also with a rigid, ironclad honor. I can't kiss you while you are under my protection, Nora, he said, his hand still cupping her face, refusing to let her go completely. You are trapped here. You are scared. You are relying on me for your survival. If I kissed you now, it would be taking advantage. It would be coercion. He ran his thumb over her lower lip, his touch shaking slightly. I am an alpha, Nora. I take what I want, but I will not take this. Not like this. Not when you have nowhere else to run. Nora stared at him, realizing the depth of his restraint. He wanted her. She could feel it in the heat of his hand, but he respected her too much to blur the lines while she was vulnerable. He leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes again, grounding himself in her presence. "But listen to me," he whispered, the promise dark and heavy in the space between them. "When this is over, when the contract is done, and you are safe and free to walk away from me." He pulled back just enough to look her in the eye, his gaze searing into her soul. "I will not hold back. I will pursue you, and I will not stop until you are mine in every way that matters." He dropped his hand from her face, the loss of contact leaving her skin cold. He stepped back, putting distance between them before his resolve shattered. "Finish your drink," he said, turning away toward the dark hallway, his voice returning to a strained, rough calm. "We have a war to win tomorrow." Nora Michaels was done trembling. The fear from the break-in and the drone had burned off, leaving behind something colder and much sharper: professional fury. She sat in the center of the room, surrounded by a chaotic sea of paper. On one side were the high-tech satellite surveys of the Jiangsan construction site. On the other were the 1867 blueprints from the hard drive Chan Wu had given her. She was overlaying them on her tablet, her stylus moving in quick, aggressive strokes. Chan Wu walked in, carrying 2 coffees. He stopped at the door. The air in the room had changed. It wasn't the air of a safe house anymore. It was the air of a command center. "You look like you're planning an invasion," he noted, setting the cup down beside her. "Better," Nora said, not looking up. "I'm planning an implosion." She tapped the screen and spun the tablet around to face him. "Look at this. This is the Forgotten Wing Foundation from the 19th century logs. See these blue lines? They aren't decorative. They are subterranean aqueducts, ancient drainage channels designed to keep the palace dry during monsoon season." She swiped to the modern Jiangsan survey. "Now look at Jiangsun's pile-driving map for their luxury condo next door. They are drilling 40 meters down to anchor their foundation." She overlaid the 2 images. The red drill points of the Jiangsan construction sat directly on top of the blue aqueduct lines. Chan Wu's eyes narrowed as he leaned in, his mind instantly shifting gears from guardian to shark. "If they drill there?" "They puncture the aqueduct," Nora finished for him. "The water pressure destabilizes the soil. Within 3 months, the palace wall collapses. But more importantly for you, their entire condo foundation liquefies. It's a sinkhole waiting to happen." She looked up at him, her eyes gleaming with a lethal intelligence. "They aren't just violating a heritage zone, Chan Wu. They are building a death trap. If we leak this geological report, their insurance underwriter pulls the policy immediately. The project dies by noon." Chan Wu stared at the map, then at her. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. It was the look of a king who had just been handed a sword by his queen. "You found the kill switch," he whispered. "I told you," Nora said, picking up her coffee. "I don't just draw pretty buildings. I know how to tear them down." The silence of the hanok was replaced by the rapid-fire clatter of keyboards and the hum of intellectual friction. They were sitting side by side at the low wooden table. The physical distance was minimal, but the mental synchronization was absolute. They were no longer protector and protected. They were partners, equals. "I'm drafting the injunction," Chan Wu said, his fingers flying across his laptop. "We cite Article 23 of the Cultural Heritage Protection Act, but we need the technical addendum to make it stick." "Already done," Nora shot back, sliding a file onto his screen. "I've referenced the soil density variance and the hydrostatic pressure limits. It's bulletproof. I use the standard ISO codes, so their foreign investors can't claim translation error." Chan Wu didn't pause. He integrated her data into his legal brief instantly. "Good. I'll attach the liquidity risk assessment. If the project stalls for more than 30 days, their bridge loans default." Make sure you mention the vibration impact, Nora added, pointing at a graph on her screen. Their heavy machinery exceeds the decibel limit for a historic zone by 40%. I'll add it to the tort interference claim, Chan-woo said. We hit them with a safety negligence and cultural vandalism simultaneously. He paused, looking for a specific statute citation. Civil Act 750, Nora said, not even looking at him, reading his mind. Liability for torts. Chan-woo turned to look at her. I was going to say Building Act 44. Civil Act 750 carries higher punitive damages, Nora countered, meeting his gaze. You want to hurt them, or you want to bankrupt them? Chan-woo stared at her. The chemistry was electric. It wasn't just attraction. It was the intoxicating rush of finding someone whose mind moved at the exact same velocity as his own. He was used to being the smartest person in the room. With her, he had to run to keep up. Bankrupt them, he decided, his voice dropping an octave. Then use 750, she smirked. God, you are lethal, he muttered, turning back to the screen, typing faster. The document was ready. It was 80 pages of architectural analysis, historical evidence, and legal domination. It was a dossier that would not only stop the construction, but would trigger a criminal investigation into the Jangsan Group's safety practices. Chan-woo hovered his finger over the send key. The email was addressed to the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office, the Cultural Heritage Administration, and 3 major news outlets. Are you ready? Chan-woo asked. Once I send this, your name is on it. You become the whistleblower. Nora didn't hesitate. She reached out and covered his hand with hers. They came into my home, she said, her voice steady. They put a knife in my wall. Send it. Chan-woo nodded. He didn't click the mouse himself. He waited. Nora pressed down on his index finger, adding her force to his. Click. Sent. They stepped out onto the veranda for fresh air. The adrenaline was still humming in their veins, a shared high that felt dangerously like intimacy. Chan-woo leaned against the wooden pillar, watching the snow fall lightly in the courtyard. Nora stood next to him, close enough that their arms brushed. You know, Chan-woo said quietly, my legal team would have taken 3 weeks to draft what we just did in 2 hours. Your legal team doesn't have my motivation, Nora replied. It wasn't just motivation, Chan-woo said. He turned to face her fully. It was rhythm. I've never worked with anyone like that before. It was like a symphony, Nora suggested. A weapon, Chan-woo corrected. We are a dangerous weapon, Nora Michaels. He looked at her, and the admiration in his eyes was so intense it made her knees weak. It wasn't the look of a man looking at a pretty woman. It was the look of a man realizing he had found his match. We make a good team, Nora whispered, the implications of the sentence hanging heavy in the cold air. The best, Chan-woo agreed. He reached out, tucking a stray curl behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her temple. Which is why I'm never letting you go back to working for anyone else. Is that a job offer, Chairman Park? She teased, though her breath hitched. Chan-woo's eyes darkened. It's a warning. I don't give up my best assets. He stepped closer, the invisible line blurring again. The prosecutor will have the file by now. The police will be at Jangsan's HQ within the hour. The threat is neutralizing. So it's almost over, Nora said, a pang of sadness hitting her. The isolation, the fear, the closeness. It was ending. The danger is ending, Chan-woo clarified. He leaned down, his voice a low promise against her ear. But you and I? We haven't even started. The siege was over. Secretary Lee's voice came through the phone with crisp professional satisfaction. The prosecutors raided the Jangsan HQ at 10 a.m. They recovered the bribe ledger and the illegal demolition orders. Chairman Jang is in custody. Chan-woo hung up the phone. He stood by the open gate of the Hanok, where the black Maybach was waiting, engine idling, exhaust pluming into the cold air. He turned to Nora. She was standing on the snowy threshold, looking back at the house. For 5 days, this had been her prison, her shelter, and her world. "It's done," Chanwoo said, walking over to her. "You are safe." Nora nodded, clutching her bag. "It feels strange to leave. It was quiet here." "The quiet is over," Chanwoo said, his voice hardening as he shifted back into the persona of the chairman. "Now comes the noise. Tonight is the New Year's gala at the Shilla. Every camera in Korea will be there. The press knows about the Janks arrests. They know Park and company was involved." He opened the car door for her, shielding her head with his hand. "Are you ready to walk back into the fire?" he asked. Nora looked at him. She saw the Ice King mask sliding back into place, but she knew the man beneath it now. She knew how his hand felt when she was having a nightmare. She knew how he took his coffee. "I'm ready," she said, stepping into the car, "as long as you're the one holding the match." Shilla Hotel, Presidential Suite. Time, 1930. The transition from the rustic silence of Buchchon to the hyper-luxury of the Shilla Hotel was jarring. The suite was a flurry of activity. Chanwoo had summoned a legion, hairstylists, makeup artists, and tailors. They moved around Nora like buzzing bees, pinning, brushing, and powdering. Nora stood on the podium in the center of the dressing room. She wore a gown that Chanwoo had commissioned weeks ago, banking on this very moment. It was liquid gold. The dress was a masterpiece of silk lame that draped over her dark skin like molten metal. It had a plunging back and a high slit, structured yet fluid. It was a dress designed not to blend in, but to dominate. "Ms. Michaels, hold still, please," a stylist murmured, trying to fix a stray curl. The double doors opened. The room went silent. The stylist stopped mid-motion. Chanwoo walked in. He was devastating. He wore a bespoke tuxedo of midnight blue velvet, so dark it looked black until the light hit it, with a sharp satin lapel. His hair was styled back perfectly, revealing the sharp, aristocratic lines of his face. He looked every inch the Emperor of Seoul. He stopped, his eyes landing on Nora. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His gaze swept up her body, lingering on the curve of her hip, the gold against her skin, the line of her neck. His eyes darkened, a flash of pure, possessive hunger breaking through his composure before he wrestled it back down. "Leave us," he commanded. "Sir, we haven't finished the jewelry." The head stylist protested. "I said leave," Chanwoo repeated, his voice low and absolute. "Wait in the hall." The team scrambled, bowing hastily, and vacated the room in seconds. The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving them alone in the quiet luxury. Chanwoo walked toward the velvet jewelry case sitting on the vanity. He picked up a necklace, a delicate lattice of diamonds, dripping with a single massive pear-shaped yellow diamond that matched her gown. He walked behind her. Nora watched him in the vanity mirror, her breath catching in her throat. "Lift your hair," he whispered. She obeyed, sweeping her curls up to expose the nape of her neck. Chanwoo stepped closer. He was so close his chest brushed against her bare back. The heat of him radiated through the thin silk of her dress. He brought the necklace around her throat. The cold metal kissed her skin, a sharp contrast to his warm fingers. He fumbled with the clasp for a fraction of a second, a tiny betrayal of his nerves, before snapping it shut. He didn't step away. His hands lingered on her shoulders. He leaned down, his face buried in the curve of her neck, inhaling her scent. He pressed a kiss, light, barely there, to the sensitive skin behind her ear. "You look!" He struggled for the word, his voice raspy. "Dangerous." Chanwoo took her hand and led her to the massive floor-to-ceiling mirror in the foyer. "Look," he commanded. Nora looked. The reflection was breathtaking. It was a study in contrast and power. Chan-woo, tall and broad in dark velvet, a figure of shadowy authority, and Nora, radiant in gold, her skin glowing, a figure of brilliant defiance. They looked like they belonged on a currency note. They looked like a dynasty. But Nora felt a flicker of doubt. She touched her stomach, nerves fluttering. "Chan-woo," she whispered, meeting his eyes in the reflection. "Do you know what they will say? A park? And a foreigner? A black woman? The traditionalists will have a heart attack. The press will try to tear us apart." Chan-woo tightened his grip on her hand. His expression in the mirror shifted. It wasn't the look of a businessman anymore. It was the look of a man who had already won the war. He stepped closer, wrapping his arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his side. He stood tall, chin raised, challenging the imaginary audience in the glass. "Let them talk," he said, his voice dripping with icy arrogance. "Let them write their articles. Let them gasp when we walk in." He looked at her reflection, his eyes fierce and proud. "They are used to seeing me with people who bow to me. Tonight, they will see me with the woman who saved me." He leaned in, whispering into her ear, his eyes never leaving the mirror. "Let them stare, Nora. Let them see what a king and queen look like." He turned her around to face him, the gold of her dress swirling around his legs. "Are you with me?" he asked. Nora looked up at him. The fear vanished, replaced by the steel he had fallen in love with. She squeezed his hand. "I'm with you." "Good." Chan-woo smiled, a predatory, victorious grin. "Then let's go start a riot." The Shilla Hotel, Dynasty Hall, December 31st, 2215. The doors to the Dynasty Hall opened, and the noise of 500 of Korea's elite abruptly died. It wasn't a gradual silence. It was a vacuum. Chan-woo Park and Nora Michaels stood at the top of the grand staircase. The visual impact was nuclear. Chan-woo, the prodigal son of the conglomerate empire, stood in velvet darkness. Beside him, Nora was a vision in molten gold, her hair swept up, her neck adorned with the Park family's yellow diamond, a stone that hadn't been worn in public since Chan-woo's grandmother died. Flashes erupted from the press pit at the bottom of the stairs, a strobe light storm of white blinding light. "Chin up," Chan-woo murmured, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. "Do not look at the cameras. Look at the horizon." They descended. Every step was a declaration of war against the status quo. Nora could feel the weight of the stairs: curiosity, envy, confusion, and judgment. She felt exposed, a drop of gold ink in a sea of black tie uniformity, but she felt Chan-woo's hand, warm and firm, grounding her. As they reached the floor, the crowd didn't swarm them. They maintained a respectful, terrified perimeter. This wasn't just Chan-woo, the CEO. This was Chan-woo, the man who had just dismantled a rival corporation in under 48 hours. The air around him crackled with a new, lethal kind of authority. They navigated the room, Chan-woo keeping her tucked into his side. He introduced her not as his date, but as Director Michaels. However, the old guard was waiting. Director Min, a senior board member of Park and Company, stood near the champagne fountain. He was a man of 60, entrenched in tradition, who had loudly opposed hiring a foreigner for the palace restoration. He was holding court with 3 other executives, laughing loudly. As Chan-woo and Nora approached, Min's laughter cut short. He looked Nora up and down, his eyes lingering on the gold dress with a sneer of distaste. He didn't bow. "Chairman Park," Min said, his voice dripping with false joviality. He swirled his glass. "Quite the entrance. I see you brought entertainment." Nora stiffened. The insult was draped in a smile, but it was razor sharp. Chanwoo stopped. The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 20 degrees. Director Michaels is the lead architect of the Gyeongbokgung restoration, Chanwoo said, his tone perfectly even. Ah, yes, the restoration, Min chuckled, glancing at his cronies. He took a step closer to Nora, invading her space. I must admit, I was surprised to see you here, Miss Michaels. I assumed someone of your background would feel uncomfortable in a setting of such high tradition. Surely you must feel quite out of place wearing family jewels. He gestured vaguely at her skin, then the diamond, the implication clear and venomous. You do not belong in that dress, or in this world. Nora didn't flinch. She looked Min in the eye, her posture regal. Tradition evolves, Director Min. Otherwise, it dies, just like dinosaurs. A few people gasped. Min's face turned a mottled shade of red. Watch your tone, Min snapped, his mask slipping. You are a guest here. You exist in this room only because the chairman feels charitable. The music seemed to stop. The chatter in the ballroom evaporated. Everyone within a 50-foot radius was watching. Chanwoo handed his champagne flute to a passing waiter. The glass clinked loudly on the tray. He turned to Min. He didn't step forward. He didn't raise his voice. He simply focused the full weight of his attention on the older man. Director Min, Chanwoo said. It was a quiet sound, but it carried like a gunshot. Miss Michaels is not my guest, Chanwoo continued, his voice void of any emotion, which made it terrifying. She is the woman who identified the Jangsen sabotage. She is the reason the palace still stands. Min opened his mouth to stammer a defense, but Chanwoo cut him off with a look that could have frozen the Han River. Chanwoo stepped closer, shielding Nora with his shoulder, placing himself between her and the insult. Disrespect her, and you disrespect the park name, Chanwoo stated, enunciating every syllable, and I do not tolerate disrespect. He looked at Min's name tag, then back to his eyes. You're fired. Min blinked, stunned. Chairman, you can't be serious. This is a party. I have served this board for 20 years. And it ends tonight, Chanwoo said, cold, hard, and final. Security will escort you out. Your severance package will be in the mail. Do not let me see you in my building on Monday. He signaled to the head of security, who was already moving through the crowd. 2 guards flanked Min, grabbing him by the elbows. The room was paralyzed. Chanwoo Park had just publicly executed a senior executive for insulting his architect. Chanwoo didn't watch Min get dragged away. He turned his back on him immediately, dismissing his existence. He turned to Nora. His expression softened instantly. He scanned her face, looking for cracks, looking for hurt. Are you all right? He whispered, ignoring the hundreds of eyes on them. Nora looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of shock and adoration. He hadn't just defended her, he had burned a bridge for her. I'm fine, she breathed, but you just fired a board member. I should have done it 6 months ago, Chanwoo replied. He offered her his arm. Shall we? Nora looped her arm through his. She felt the muscle beneath the velvet, tense and strong. They began to walk across the ballroom floor toward the balcony doors. The crowd didn't just move, they parted. It was a red sea of tuxedos and gowns splitting open. Nobody whispered. Nobody sneered. They looked at Nora with wide eyes, not as an outsider, but as the woman who held the leash of the most dangerous man in Seoul. They looked at her with awe. As they walked through the corridor of people, Chanwoo kept his head high, his gaze forward, looking like a king escorting his queen through a conquered court. Head up, Nora, he whispered again, a smile touching his lips. Let them bow. And as they passed, some of them actually did. The penthouse balcony, Gangnam. December 31st, 2350. The gala was a memory. The champagne, the cameras, the terrified faces of the board members. It all felt miles away. Chanwoo had whisked them out of the hotel 20 minutes ago, driving like a man possessed, not toward a second party, but home. Now, they stood on the terrace of his penthouse, 80 stories above the city. The air was thin and freezing, but the heat radiating from the city below, and the man standing next to her, kept the cold at bay. From this height, Seoul was a sea of light. Far in the distance, near Jongno, a massive crowd had gathered at the Bosingak Pavilion for the traditional bell-ringing ceremony. The hum of millions of people was a low vibration in the air, a heartbeat anticipating the shift of time. Chanwoo stood by the glass railing, his hands gripping the metal bar. He had taken off his velvet jacket and draped it over Nora's shoulders. He stood in his tuxedo shirt, the wind ruffling his hair, staring out at the empire he owned, but didn't seem to care about right now. He checked his watch, 23:55. He turned to face her. The look in his eyes was unreadable. It wasn't the heat of the kitchen or the fury of the courtyard. It was solemn, final. "We made it," he said softly. "We did," Nora agreed, pulling the lapels of his jacket tighter. It smelled of him, cedar, and the night. "The police report is filed. Jang-san is in custody. The security threat is officially graded at 0. Chanwoo recited the facts like a list of inventory items. He took a step toward her, stopping 3 feet away. The invisible line. He had reestablished it. "The contract is done, Nora," he said. His voice was steady, but there was a fracture in it, a hairline crack in the ice. "You are no longer under my protection. You are free." Nora stared at him. She saw what he was doing. He was giving her an exit. He was the alpha who had sworn not to coerce her, not to take advantage of her vulnerability. He believed that because the danger was gone, his utility to her was over. He was letting the bird out of the cage, even if it broke his heart to watch it fly. "Free?" Nora repeated, testing the word. "So I can go back to my apartment? Back to my old life?" "Yes," Chanwoo nodded once, his jaw tight. "A car is waiting downstairs to take you wherever you wish to go. You owe me nothing." He looked away, unable to sustain eye contact as he let her go. "It has been an honor, Nora." The city below began to roar. The energy shifted. The countdown was starting. Nora took a step forward. She crossed the 3 feet of distance. She crossed the line he had drawn in the snow, in the bedroom, and in his mind. "You're an idiot, Chanwoo Park," she whispered. Chanwoo's head snapped back to her, stunned. "Excuse me?" Nora reached out. She placed her hand flat against the crisp white cotton of his shirt, right over his heart. It was hammering, a frantic, desperate rhythm that betrayed his calm words. "You think I stayed with you because of the drone?" she asked, stepping closer until the toes of her heels touched his shoes. "You think I trusted you because of the security guards?" "Nora, I don't want to be free," she cut him off, her voice fierce and trembling with emotion. She grabbed the front of his shirt, bunching the fabric in her fist, anchoring herself to him. "I don't want to go back to an empty apartment. I don't want a life where you aren't drinking coffee next to me. I don't want to be safe, Chanwoo. I want to be yours." Chanwoo stared down at her, the walls of his resolve crumbling into dust. The Ice King was gone. All that was left was a man who had waited a lifetime to hear those words. Far below, the countdown began. A million voices screaming in unison. 10! Chanwoo's hand came up. It shook slightly before he buried it in her hair, cupping the back of her head. 9. "Are you sure?" he rasped, his eyes searching hers one last time, giving her one last chance to run. "If I kiss you now, Nora, I am never letting you go." 8. Nora looked up at him. her eyes shining with tears and triumph. If you don't kiss me, I'm quitting the project. 7. A laugh, half sob, half relief, broke from Chan-woo's throat. 6. He moved. He didn't just lean down, he grabbed her, his other arm wrapped around her waist, crushing the gold silk against his chest. 5. He lifted her. Nora gasped as her feet left the ground, her body pressed entirely against his height, his strength overwhelming and perfect. 4. Mine, he growled against her mouth. 3. Yours, she promised. 2. 1. Bong. The deep, resonant toll of the Bosingak bell echoed across the city. Fireworks exploded over the Han River, painting the sky in violent streaks of crimson and gold. But on the balcony, the world had narrowed down to 2 people. Chan-woo kissed her. It wasn't a tentative first kiss. It was an avalanche. It was the outpouring of weeks of restraint, of sleeping 3 feet apart, of terrified glances in the snow, of rage and fear and silence. It was hungry and possessive and deeply, ruinously tender. Nora wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on for dear life as he devoured her, his mouth moving over hers with a desperate familiarity. He kissed her like he was trying to breathe her into his lungs, like he was stamping his claim on her soul. 1 minute past midnight. The fireworks were fading into smoke. The cheers below were a dull roar. Slowly, reluctantly, Chan-woo lowered her until her feet touched the balcony floor, though he didn't loosen his grip on her waist. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hair messed by her hands, his eyes blown wide and dark. He looked wrecked in the most beautiful way possible. Nora was breathless, her gold dress shimmering in the ambient light. A single cold flake landed on her cheek, then another. Nora looked up. It's snowing. It was a gentle snow, not a blizzard, not a threat, just a soft, quiet blanket covering the city, washing away the old year, the old fears, and the old loneliness. Chan-woo didn't look at the sky. He couldn't take his eyes off her. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. He closed his eyes, exhaling a long, shuddering breath of total peace. He brought his hand up to her cheek, his thumb brushing away the snowflake that had landed there. The contract is void, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. New terms. What are the terms? Nora smiled against his skin. Forever, he said. He kissed her forehead, then the tip of her nose, and finally pulled her back into his arms, burying his face in her neck. Happy New Year, Nora, he murmured into her skin, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in the universe. You are home. The end. Thank you for watching. If you love this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more emotional twists and character-driven plots. Drop a comment below. What moment stood out to you the most? And if you're ready for the next story, make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Until next time, keep believing in love that defies all odds.